Larson, your friendly neighborhood artist, and this month's Lady of Light, or featured artist for June, is the amazing Rachel Ruysch. Rachel Ruysch was a fine artist who thrived during the 1600s to the 1700s. Rachel was born during the heyday of the Dutch tulip mania. So the Dutch tulip mania was an asset bubble, it's called, and it was a time period where tulip bulbs thrived in the new market. The Dutch people experienced a new sort of economy when they were no longer a part of the Spanish colonial empire. So during the 1600s, the tulip became the sort of status symbol of the new merchant class of the Dutch experience. So Rachel had the opportunity of being born into an affluent family that explored art and science. Her uncle was an architect for the Dutch Empire, and her father was a botanist. So Rachel's early years were spent sort of free outside among nature. She wasn't a working class person, so she could enjoy her time, which is something I think that's sort of understated about having access to time, especially for a female, especially in the 1600s, to just create, to explore, to dream, to daydream. Her style developed very early on in life. By the time she was 15, she was apprenticed to study sketching and painting with a world-famous Dutch artist at the time. And she was also responsible for helping her father refine his own sketching technique and ended up helping him sketch. One of the fun things that I love about the father-daughter relationship, which was an exciting sort of tie-in for June, because it's the month of Father's Day here in Canada, was that Rachel and her father had a wonderful bond. He created many miniatures because of his botany. He had also developed a proprietary injection sort of solution that allowed flowers and organs and body parts to remain in a 3D state so that it could be studied with more detail. So here I have the printables that are included for today's class. You could shrink them down, you could make them bigger, whatever you decide you like, but I just thought they were so delightfully strange, which is kind of my style. If you've been here a minute, you know I'm not angels and cats all the time, and if there are, there's usually a twist. So I love these because these are the combined collaborative effort between Rachel and her father. They would often stage, and actually the Russian Alexander the Great bought, in the 1600s, bought his entire collection, and he started again, and him and his daughter would stage skeletons among flowers. And one of the amazing freedoms that Rachel had as she was creating her art was that she had access to this library of foliage and flora collected by her father that was scientifically studied. So her way of looking at things was very detailed and very precise. Now, we're not necessarily going to aspire to create the level of realism that Rachel did in her work, but we're going to borrow a little bit through these beautiful sort of slightly strange photocopies that we're going to include. But we're going to touch on how she used asymmetry to create these beautiful, interesting bouquets, and that she didn't necessarily include flowers that were all found in the same place. This is something that's unique about her style, especially as a female. Being creative and sort of interjecting your own perspective into art wasn't necessarily widely accepted or respected by your male counterparts at that time. So for her to be able to pull together different flowers that didn't necessarily exist in nature and combine them into a bouquet that featured life and death, not just always beauty in its flowering state. She liked to include that, which I do as well. I feel like, you know, me and my cycles, death and decay are a part of the living cycle. So to leave it out seems slightly irresponsible. And I get the literal perspective of the 1600s may not be everybody's aesthetic, so you don't necessarily have to include these. You can definitely just dive into the flowers, but that's what we're going to have some fun with, is her beautiful contrasting bouquets. So we're going to come in on the asymmetry. We're going to explore having a dark background with some beautiful bold flowers in the front. We're going to explore focal points by having one or two blooms that really anchor us. We're going to use that Fibonacci spiral to help us sort of guide the direction that I found she used a lot. Although it's not documented that Rachel used the Fibonacci symbol as a compositional element for her work, I feel that her natural inclination to study plant life as she did growing up as a child with all the time she wanted would have imparted to her very organically that as plants grow, they share the sunlight, right? So there is that sort of geometric pattern that you observe in a tree or a plant that has a lot of leaf or foliage, that they don't cover up the sunlight for the leaves below them. So building these exotic ecosystem bouquets of flowers coming from different parts of the world that wouldn't have existed or bloomed at the same time had that element of natural order and natural symmetry within it because of how she observed plants growing in nature already. So I'm excited to dive into this class today. You're going to only need a few things. You can use watercolor paper, you can use a stretch canvas, whichever you prefer. We're going to do this class in acrylic, so you're going to need acrylic paint in your favorite colors. I like to use a limited palette of black, white, red, yellow, and blue, but you can always incorporate whatever works best for you.
All right, friends, so this class is a slightly bit longer class. It's going to take you some drawing time, so you may want to plan a couple of days for this and not be in a rush to complete it all in one sitting. I would definitely recommend watching the entire video first just to get an idea where your process and my process may already differ and things that you may not need to learn from me but already have your own idea for, or if you decide as we go along that you like a direction I'm headed in slightly different, you'll already be well prepared as you set out on your own. So today you're going to want to prepare your colors. I'm using my usual limited palette of black, white, green, red, yellow, and blue. I'm using my Natural Earth paint products right now, my plant-based acrylics. You can use whatever works best for you. You can use it on watercolor paper, heavy mixed media paper, or on stretch canvas as I will demonstrate today. Key colors to maintain are white and black. One of the wonderful things that Rachel Ruysch did was keep beautiful color and drama. I mean, her realism is so beyond what I'm able to impart for you guys. So please don't worry, we're not going to aim for that level of reality in our work, but we're going to take inspiration from her. And for this, I want to sort of show you boldly how to go ahead and do that. Like, we love her art, we love the style, we love all the things, but we know that our skills are maybe not quite what they need to be to represent her work in an accurate fashion. So that shouldn't dissuade you from trying to create based on your own personal subjective likes of that particular work. So I love the drama, I love the contrast, I love the very dark and the very light. I like that it's flowers from imagination, basically, because she didn't paint from a still life that she stared at per se. Now, she may have painted the models that her and her father created, the dioramas and stuff, but that's not necessarily the case, and it doesn't have to be our case. So what I want you to do is have a really good chaos layer. So that's what I'm showing you here. One of the larger canvases is going to be this. So in your base layer, I want you to have a lot of green, a lot of floral tones, because the whole issue with our approach to this is it's going to be really tempting to get tight. So we're going to fill the canvas with all sorts of energy, plant life energy, before we get started. That way, as we do go ahead and reduce, we don't lose the brightness of our initial layers, because we're going to do those in lighter colors, and we can be more judicious about how much we take away, right? So that can definitely take more than one sitting for you to eyeball. You don't have to be in a rush. I finished mine and I feel like maybe I could have done with less of the black at the end and left more of the blue and purple. So that's why I suggest you watch the entirety of the video and see what you think before you go ahead and try it. Now, this video is going to be slightly longer with the change in format and my reducing the amount of text in these episodes and being more podcast. There'll be more art. But do not worry, I will not try and fill it with me talking the entirety of the time. I will put on some lovely music and you can just watch me work as well, because that is something that I feel like we sort of stopped doing with the shorter format videos, was eliminating you guys getting to see how the artist does the art. Well, and that's kind of like the whole thing that we're looking for, is I learn visually. So if I'm not seeing you do it and it's just clipping to that product's already finished at that stage, I kind of feel like we're missing some juice. So anyway, I'm backing it up. We're expanding the videos. They're going to be a bit longer. So here what I've done is I put a really wet brush together and then went in on a base layer with some white primer paint. And now I'm also going on top of that moist layer with some green, some yellow, some blue, and yes, it's all wet, and that's okay. You do not have to do this particular layer in stages. You could do it in a jelly print format, you could do it with sponges, you could do it with saran wrap instead of a paintbrush. Like, this is the fun time where you can have texture. And I invite you to explore, like Rachel Ruysch's work with the photocopy printables that we've included here. There's that really cool kind of crinkly looking dried kelp or moss or something in the picture that is in there. So you can have kind of like a crinkled up underlayer where you've got the green and it looks dark and veiny, because we're going to come around this like a vignette with a really dark paint color. And that's going to pop everything that's light colored forward anyway. So do not worry about this stage. Have a lot of fun. If you love to write little hidden messages for yourself, you could definitely take the advantage of that and do it in Sharpie pen at this stage, because again, we're going to be doing some layers here. So it's not going to be the highlight of the end result. But definitely stay within the wheelhouse of realistic colors if you're looking for that kind of impact from your floral. Don't necessarily head in with too many bizarre colors. I am going to challenge myself here with this particular chaos layer because I loved all the dynamic energy of it. So here I'm just sort of demonstrating a roughed out Fibonacci spiral that I talked about earlier. And I showed you at the beginning of the video where it kind of looks like a seashell. So that's the idea here, is we're going to I drew that shape in where I plan to put the major white and pink flowers, and everything else will swing out in a spiral shape from that center point. Now where I put that white strip is where I tentatively have decided to collage the printable vase that I included that was created, the art or the sketch version was created in the 1700s by Rachel's father. So this is a fun Father's Day tie-in class as well, where I found it really fun to see that this kind of cooperation could exist in the 500 years ago and have had such a wonderful impact. Rachel's art sold for 1,200 guilders, and for perspective, at that time Rembrandt's highest painting went for 500. So the level of skill and value that she commanded for her work, and I mean, she did her paintings well into her 80s. Rachel had 10 children and supported her family alongside her husband, who was also an artist, and her father and family, who were scientists, botanists, and artists as well. Her uncle, like as I mentioned, was an architect. So creativity and creative thought and critical thinking was definitely, very commonplace in their small ecosystem of a house, whether or not it was commonplace during the Dutch Golden Era or during the asset bubble that occurred, or tulip mania. Who's to say? But I have to imagine that for there lack to be any evidence of things being bad there, it must have been a harmonious existence growing up amongst all of that knowledge, and being able to relate to it confidently as a female adult would have been a big deal. So here I have gone in with my ultramarine blue and my ultramarine purple and just sort of carved out my vignette shape. You don't have to get too crazy with the shape. You can just do a large kind of slightly ovalish circle. I did carve out sort of a diagonal slice as to create that center point in the seashell shape that we talked about, coming out this Fibonacci spiral from the center, because I like how Rachel had the asymmetry. That is one of the things I love most about her bouquets, is they weren't super persnickety balance. Like, there's obviously balance there because she's got the skills of a fine artist, but the balance is more creative and more dynamic and less like dead and still, less plopped, right? And she was known for leaving cut stems in her pictures, or various stages of coming apart of the flowers. Like, you wouldn't necessarily get all of the flowers as they're at the height of their growth. She'd have some wilting, or some, maybe they had been smooshed together kind of thing. So I want you to remember that as we work towards our flowers. You may not like the petals or flowers I choose, so after watching this, you'll be able to kind of maybe do a quick Google search, look for your favorite flowers. Remember, they do not have to be all from the same part of the world or bloom at the same time of year or still exist. You can have some fun creating these from your imagination and still keep within the spirit of this month's featured artist, because a lot of the bouquets she did paint couldn't have existed in real life. And like I said, I think that was a huge liberty to have when you're making art, using resources, taking up space as a female to create imaginary beauty, and yet still get paid twice what Rembrandt was earning at the time. So she is a wonderful example of, I don't even know what the word is, but I like her history. I feel like it's just positive for once, instead of it being sort of sourced in pain. Because if you think about some of her art, I mean, her and her dad were so well known for their dioramas of dead things, to be quite honest. I know there's probably a more eloquent way to say that, but that was what they were known for. And at that time and place in their culture, it wasn't ew kind of vibe when you're thinking about it. Whereas nowadays, I would say that people would see that as sort of like a darker aesthetic, a more Gothic aesthetic, and maybe that's because that's where we derive it from, is the Gothic era. But life and death and the cycles and science, knowledge was powerful, so you weren't silly about it. You didn't shy away from it because it didn't somehow meet your personal aesthetic. So the death being a part of it is probably more shocking to our modern taste than it was at that time. So that's just something to bear in mind as you work with it. Like I said, if you don't like the vase, if you find it too macabre or it's just not to your taste, feel free to skip it. You can definitely take a closer look at her work online and have a zoom in at the bottom. I ended up having to jack up the brightness on her art because there's actually quite a bit of background, but because most of it is so dark and painted in very tone-on-tone colors for the background, if you brighten the contrast of a screenshot, you can actually see more of the wall in the background. The vase suddenly pops out because it generally just looks like a spill of flowers, but that I think has to do with the illusion created by the high contrast. Those mid-tones of foliage and flowers that create the third dimension almost get lost. They're still there enough for your eye to reconstruct the image and to love the realism that occurs, but it's not overwhelming. So here, as I've been blabbing away, I'm going in with my reds and pinks and mauve colors to start creating some blooms. I sort of opted for rose-like shapes and tulip-esque shapes because of tulip mania. There's sort of a kind of a long, stocky, maybe phlox-like flower. So I use the term like because I don't want you to get hung up on like, oh, it has to be perfect. We are not aiming for perfection. We're just aiming for, if you took a screenshot of her work, put it in oil filter, you would see what I mean. It's more suggestions of flowers instead of the hyper-realistic style that Rachel was known for. Now, if you want to print out and collage in photographs of tulips or roses, absolutely, please feel free to go ahead and add your unique flavor to this piece. It is a mixed media piece, so we're going to do stages where we have to dry it. We're going to use Posca paint pens at a mid stage to create more stalks because they do disappear with the abundance of floral elements. So there'll be lots of opportunities for you to reflect and see, like, maybe this has a different direction for you personally, which I want to encourage more as we head into 2025. I want you to paint, so if the class doesn't necessarily tick all the boxes for your particular taste, please feel free to switch it up and still play along, still tag me, still tell me what you're up to, still take this as an opportunity to try something you haven't tried before, because that always leads to more exciting things. So here I've got enough flowers out. I'm tempted to do more yellow and orange always, but I'm trying to be a little bit more limited in my palette. So feel free to use all the colors if that's what you're drawn to. But you're going to always find that you don't add enough greenery, and 90% of the time that's what's missing. So I'm just going in here and I'm trying to vary my shades of green. So I've added some ultramarine blue to the green and gone in for deeper leaves, and then I added in some lighter colors. My base layer of titanium white is dry, so using a flat brush and just sort of placing it on a like 90-degree angle and then tilting it slightly, so 45, and then kind of rippling and dragging, creates an interesting flower-like petal stroke. So feel free to have fun on a scrap piece of paper before you hit the canvas if you're a little nervous about it, but ultimately give the video a watch. You'll see I'm not using anything complicated to create flower shapes. A lot of them are just C curves or little wiggles or S shapes. Squint, you know, keep the impressionist, expressionist idea there, because Rachel's paintings being so amazing and so detailed, that's inspiring, but that's not ultimately what I love to focus on. It's that drama that I feel from her paintings and that freshness of colors. So that's what we're going to sort of cling to as our focus. If you feel like you need to take that photocopy paper and bring it into the top area at the end, that's where I would suggest you do it after things have dried. You can totally come in and add more collage. I don't end up doing that. I kind of stop at the dark, but I mean, what I also wanted to mention too is, like, you have a month to do this art. A lot of us get into that chop, 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 art mode, must finish before I forget to finish it. But if you sort of look at your Running with Rainbows, membership as like, I have 30 days to work on this. I could sort of take a week to pick my canvas and slowly make my way to painting and refer back to the video multiple times instead of a one and done kind of experience. I think it'll go a little bit more smoothly or you'll enjoy it more, right? So we all have these awesome memberships, and I feel like there's just such a rush to get to everything that we're not digging into the materials. So I want to offer you guys longer videos with more to dig into, more skill building, and more inspiration to come from actually watching the process. So still just building. I really wanted to bring in some blue and white because I love blue and white flowers. So for this particular technique, I'm using a flat brush, and I am putting on one side of the paintbrush blue and on the other side white, and I am just sort of laying my brush 90 degrees on the canvas and pouncing down once and then lifting up. So the brush itself is doing 99% of the work, and the two colors help trick the eye into seeing sort of that blend that a petal does. So that's how I'm filling in some of the gaps with just the small blue and white flower, so that if there's an area where I don't really want to add more greenery, but I feel like it's missing something and I don't want to feel like I'm trying to jam in a pink flower or a small tulip, these little blue flowers, because you can do them in lots of colors. You could vary that white and yellow, white and taupe, white and orange, and it's just a fun 5-petaled shape that most of us recognize as, well, 5 petals, it's a flower, right? So it's a fun little trickster shape you can add into a lot of your artsy bouquets. So you see right there, very simple. You could use that for a pansy or for a violet as well. It lends itself to a lot. If you were around in the 90s, the Miss Donna Dewberry one-stroke painting would have definitely inspired a lot of this. I found that that technique and style helped sort of give to me the notion that it could be less instead of a lot of brushwork. Knowing what one brushstroke can do and layering those really took a lot of the stress out of creating flowers. So here is sort of I've backed up, giving you guys a bit of a wider view of the vignette shape that's here. So try to remember, we're still going to add that vase along that white stripe there in the bottom, but you can see how those darker colors in the background allowed that first layer that we went down with the mauves, the pinks, and the reds to be a darker version of the true shade, which is great. Leave that be, because when you come on top of it, as I have here in that top left corner next to the tulips and the stockier area, I can come a little bit lighter. So you can vary petals and strokes as long as you're not trying to micromanage your shape and work in sort of, like I said, if you squint your eyes and blur, you can make it more interesting by lightening your colors and coming up higher by going into smaller sections. I think I'm saying it backwards. So let me try again. We have the dark colors in the background, the midtones, and then you use less of, say, white, but you create that highlight on the top layer, and it does add that 3-dimension for you without it being realistic. It just energizes the piece. It keeps it from being flat without necessarily having to resort to realism, which is a wonderful thing that really adds an element to your own practice when you can even though it's not realistic looking, everybody knows what it is, right? Like that red and white stripe with the tulip. The thick impasto-like effect was so successful in a lot of work because the base layer was composed of a deep underlayer with a mid-tone and then a light layer instead of just one color value. I'm not using a lot of water, by the way. I'm not rinsing my brush obsessively. I'm allowing the colors to dance with each other, even into the green, because of course green and red will neutralize each other, creating a bit of a brown color, which is great. It adds shadow, it adds depth. There is going to be brown elements to leaves and stalks of flowers. None of them are perfectly green. So don't be afraid to allow some of those colors to mix and play together. That will create a harmony within your tones because they're all sort of made with each other. So feel free to add as much detail as you like. This is a wonderful stage. Now I end up coming in with some black, which I love, but as you proceed for yourself, bear in mind your seashell shape of the Fibonacci spiral. So that top right and the bottom left corners were sort of vacant areas of that seashell shape. So you could leave a bit more purple or blue in the adjacent areas to maintain that kind of petally energy without covering it up by using all the black. So here is that piece we did earlier. I'm just roughing in that sort of Fibonacci spiral using my black Sharpie. You definitely do not have to use a black Sharpie. You could go ahead and use a pencil, but I wanted you to be able to see it on camera. So in this case, instead of coming with the flowers too much at the front, I'm just going to start carving out those areas along the Fibonacci spiral where there is no connecting space to that center spiral, right? Because that's where we want to focus our blooms, is in the heart of the origin of the spiral, and then we're going to come out along the spiral shape. And I love that diagonal asymmetry, so I've managed to keep that there. Now I'm going to just come in. I've got some blue and white on my brush and create some florally like orb shapes. I guess you could call them like pancakes, but this is that mid-tone, right? So here I want to add that base layer and then let it dry so that I can come in and add another layer for some petals on top. Creating that dimension adds that element of energy and realism in a piece. Okay, so the under layers are dried. Now we're going to add our vase in, so go ahead and cut out your printable. Separate the two pieces, the jar from the base there and the top. As I mentioned earlier, you're welcome to take those cool seaweed bits, cut them out however you like. You might want to cut them into more differentiated pieces or just the one, and you can add that into the bouquet in the top if you want to maintain sort of that photocopy piece in the bottom, photocopy piece somewhere in the top. You don't have to. As I said, I didn't end up doing it here, but it's definitely something I am prone to doing, so if you feel drawn to it, absolutely. I am using matte medium for this stage. Definitely wouldn't recommend using anything glossy because the gloss will make it hard to go on top with Posca paint pens or with the acrylic paint after. So the matte medium is better because it just blends harmoniously, you don't even know it's there, and then the vases will be nicely glued down, and you can go in and add what we will do next is the Posca paint pen layer so that we can bring out vases and add a little bit of hyper detail to some of the petals, and then we can go ahead and do another layer of acrylic so that if we aren't super jazzed or we've overthought the line work, we can definitely loosen that up again with some acrylic paint. With collage, especially, I would start, if it's your first time, stay small. Don't use a big piece. There was two printables, one with a really big hand, so if it printed out in the 8x10 size, I would definitely recommend either cutting it down smaller, using some from the inside, or just going with the other printable to start, simply because air bubbles can be a thing, and it's definitely intimidating and frustrating if you're just starting out to experience that right off the hop. So go with a smaller collage printable, which I have here, and make sure you marry it well. So marrying it means putting matte medium on the paper itself, on the back, really soaking it in. You could even spray your collages printables with water first gently and letting them sort of get wet before you apply your matte medium, and that would help reduce any chance of it not sticking to the canvas properly. And then really don't be shy and put a lot of your matte medium down on the canvas. And then when you smooth it out, just make sure you take your time to work from the center out, and then come back to it, a few minutes after you've set it down, just to make sure you're not seeing any big bubbles immediately. Give it a quick smooth down. But if you're using a smallish piece of collage paper for this, it really shouldn't present too much of a problem for you. And then you're definitely going to want to let it dry at least, I would say, give it a day. But if you like to do art, you can give it a few hours. Acrylic paint, which matte medium basically is just clear acrylic paint, or semi-opaque or semi-transparent. It mixes well with acrylic paint. So if you've got a little bit of wet matte medium on your canvas, as you go back in to maybe tighten up some blooms or loosen up some blooms, it won't be a problem. The only thing it would present a problem with is your Posca paint pens. So if you're going to immediately dive into Posca paint pen and mark making before you go in with another layer of acrylic, then definitely let this dry a full day. It's not a bad idea either to get in the habit of pacing yourself and, stopping the arting for a bit and cleaning up, maybe making sure you go outside. Summer has hit here in Manitoba. We got to enjoy it before the mosquitoes and snow return. Alright, so the collage is now 100% dry. I really like how this has turned out. As I said, you may use less black, less pastas than I do. You may decide you would prefer to use neo colors or pastels. So all of that is absolutely beautiful at this stage of the painting, and I recommend you use it. Again, we're not trying to emulate Rachel's work identically, so you can avoid staying in the hyper-realistic mindset and go into definitely more abstracted flower pieces. If you're going to use pastels or neo colors, you're going to need to apply a working fixative or spectra fix after those layers and let them dry fully before going on top of it with any kind of varnish or acrylic paint that might go across anything. And you definitely want to put that on top of Posca pens. You do not want to go with your Posca paint pens on top of chalk pastels, such as new pastels or even the neo colors, which are not oil based, but they do have a bit of a wax to them, so you would want to use Posca first. And that is what I'm doing here. So I've just given my turquoise a shake. I love turquoise. It has a bit of pop. I'm using the colors I have. I don't buy Posca paint pens regularly, so I have had their regular green, the dark forestry type of green before, and that's beautiful, but I happen to have turquoise. So please use whatever you have on hand. Don't feel you have to run out special for them. It's just a nice option to have. And if you have a different brand, Sharpie's had paint pens. I'm sure Michael's has their own brand. If you're in the States, I'm sure all of those Hobby Lobbies and places like that have their own brands. So use what you love. But here's a fun stage to just add more mark making. I'm not going to say do 1,000 little leaves, but the suggestion of veins of leaves here and there, a tendril, a spiral of leaf likeness, because you're still going to come in with another layer of dark paint or black paint, as I will. You can also come back in and finger paint in some blooms, or maybe even a dash of spatter. I have to be real with you. I'm just realizing right now I didn't really do any spatter in this painting, and I'm kind of amazed because that's kind of a thing I like, but I really enjoyed how our doing that base layer in that light colored background with the blues, the greens, and the pinks stayed bright because of the darkening of the corners. So I was just happy that that energy stayed, so I didn't feel the need to oxygenate the painting, as I call spattering. I always feel like if it's too tight, the dash of spatter will loosen up a painting. So I feel like this was a good milestone for me as well. Yep, and you're going to want to tie your printable vase elements to the rest of the painting. So taking out a white mark paint pen and doing reflections of what would be the glass if it was shining through the specimen bottle onto the table. All of this is great to do now because, again, you're going to come in with dark colored paint. So if there's anything you don't like, you can cover it up. However, I will say that even if it's not covered up, what it does by coming through the background is doing more for your field of view than maybe initially thought. So don't hesitate to have a lot of busyness to cover up. Don't feel like, oh my God, I've covered it up. As you may initially feel, but I will definitely say give this painting a few days to sit somewhere without you staring at it obsessively, and it will allow itself to breathe and you will see more out of it. So here, yes, I did go in with a lot of black. I kept some white and added in the highlights in the bottom, and I will show you the stills at the end, and I'll show them in the body of the post as well. But I also had fun just sort of dragging white from the bottom of the painting just to add some light bouncing off of it. But this is where I want you to sort of make it your own, and feel free to embellish as you will. You can always come back in and add more flowers, take away flowers with black, right? So sky's the limit. Doesn't have to be done in one shot. And if you don't end up enjoying what you create, and gesso over it and start again. That is the joy and the beauty of art. So hopefully you guys have a great June. Enjoy this class, and if you share it, be sure to tag me.